Joining us now to discuss the direction of these protests is Madgie Nicolas, a member of the Black Voices for Trump 2020 National Advisory Board. Madgie, when we first kind of saw the beginning of these type of protests, it was right after the Ahmaud Arbery killing, and then right after that, it was George Floyd. And I feel like a lot of people saw those videos and were largely on board with the idea of maybe systemic changes or at least police reforms. But then we see the Rayshard Brooks case, and that one seems to be a little bit more ambiguous, a little bit more of a debate behind the idea of use of force. What does this big picture tell you about the protests and how they've developed since the beginning?
Well, thank you for having me, Alex. It's a pleasure to be on your network. And thank you for telling the right story at the right time. This state has been unrest for a long time. I mean, our country's been unrest for a long time. And we can't sit there and keep thinking that it's the racial division that the media is portraying us to become. So all those that's happening right now, my condolences to the people who have died, including police officers that we have that have laid their lives during this moment, during this crisis. So it's insane what we have to go through. None of those, besides Rashad, that I have read, what has happened. If you have been stopped by a police officer, I suggest you calmly stop. If they request your ID, you give your ID. And if they ask you to remove yourself out of your car, you remove yourself out of the car, and you go along where you comply.
Right.
For Rashad, I feel like the media and the radical left has taken this story with this extreme tension that we have about racism at this point right now. The Rashad story had nothing to do with police brutality at the Black community. It has nothing to do with it. It has something to do with a man who is Black that was stopped by a white police officer. I get it. The media is going to take the Black and white and use the race card against us. But it had nothing to do with that.
Yeah. And
the man was the DUI. He has a DUI, and he was stopped for DUI, and all he had to do is comply.
Yeah, and even if we look at the situation in a vacuum, which is, I think, the way that we should do it, know what was in the police officer's mind at the time they made that decision, because we now have the luxury of weeks now of different information coming out. We didn't have to respond in a quick type of situation the same way that police officers did then and have to do every single day. And in my opinion, I think by putting these all together, it does kind of cloud the whole movement a little bit, because when you look at the George Floyd case, when you looked at the Ahmaud Arbery case, that was something that was a very compelling argument. I mean, for the most part, we look at polls and the American people are very much so on board with exactly what is happening on when it comes to those demonstrations. But when you then bring in the Rayshard Brooks case, that's when things get a little bit more murky. That's when people are saying, well, maybe that was a justified use of force. Maybe that was a time where police were responding correctly. So it does bring some ambiguity into this subject. So going into an election year, we've seen that Democrats are already trying to use this as a big type of political advantageous point for them. Joe Biden has been saying that he doesn't want to necessarily defund the police, but he does want reforms. And we see gridlock taking place right now on Capitol Hill. What do you think this will mean for the November election?
Oh, it's the awakening. I'm hoping with all this that's happening right now, the destruction of our country, those unrest, those riots, those it's criminal what's happening in our country. Our country feels like a third world country. When we have a president that put our country on a pedestal, he put our people on a pedestal. He's been working hard to keep us safe, and we have to go back. It's like a backward. We went backward in history. We didn't have to do that. We didn't have to act like savages. Like, that's not who we are. It doesn't portray the Black community at all. And you could tell the media is actually behind it, pushing it back to make us feel like we savages. And that's not who we are. So I'm hoping this November 3rd, it's the awakening. We have a president who's working hard. We have a president who wants the safety of our country. We have a president who has the economy growing, and he's going to go back and do it again after the COVID-19. I want people to stop looking at the TV, understanding what's happening, understanding the agenda, understanding the narrative that we're being pushed at. We're being pushed. It's right in our face right now, and we have to fight it. As conservative, we have to fight the conservative values that we have, and we have to put a stop at the unrest that we're having right now.
And I think
Law
it's
and order to go back.
No, I think you're right. I think it's important, too, for our viewers to know that this type of conflict makes for good television and also good ratings. And that's why the media likes to focus on stuff like this. That's why you don't turn on the news very often and see all the feel-good stories, because that's not what drives ratings. That's not what drives people to the network and gets people talking about it. So when you set up this division, on any network for that matter, you see the back and forth, and I think that's something that the media is trying to capitalize on. And I think that's a good testament to what we will see come November. Once you get those divisions going, you start getting more enthusiasm behind the different bases. I think that's the strategy almost for both sides as well. And I'd like to see a little bit more pushback from our Republican lawmakers as well, because as of right now, this has been a narrative that's been entirely controlled by Democrats for the most part. I haven't heard much from Republicans other than the police reform bill that's making its way through Capitol Hill right now.